In 1994, a 20-year-old kid from the Queensbridge housing projects in New York City released an album that would rewrite the rules of hip-hop forever. 2 years later, a 26-year-old hustler from the Marcy projects in Brooklyn dropped his own debut, a record he believed would be his first and his last. One album became the measuring stick for an entire genre. The other became the blueprint for turning street wisdom into an empire. Decades later, the debate still rages. It has sparked wars of words, legendary diss tracks, a feud that tore New York City apart, and a reconciliation so powerful it made grown men embrace on stage in front of 15,000 screaming fans. This is the story of Illmatic versus Reasonable Doubt, and why the question of which album is better might be the most important debate in the history of rap music. The birth of Illmatic. Nasser Jones grew up in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in America. The Queensbridge houses in Long Island City, Queens, were the largest public housing development in the country, and by the late 1980s, the crack epidemic had turned its hallways into war zones. Nas dropped out of school in the 8th grade, but he never stopped educating himself. His father, Ulu Dara, was a jazz and blues musician, and young Nasir absorbed the rhythms of language and melody from the very beginning. He started writing rhymes as a teenager, sharpening his pen with a discipline that went far beyond his years. By the time he was 17, he had already appeared on Main Source's track Live at the Barbecue in 1991, and the hip-hop underground immediately took notice. Something was different about this kid. He rapped like he had already lived several lifetimes. When it came time to record Illmatic, Nas assembled a production roster that no debut artist had any business securing. DJ Premier, Pete Rock, Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest, Large Professor, and LES all contributed beats. 5 elite producers on one project from a kid who had never released an album? That was virtually unheard of. The result was 10 tracks of pure, uncut New York hip-hop that clocked in at just under 40 minutes. There was no filler, no wasted bars, no throwaway moments. Every single word carried weight. NY's State of Mind opened with one of the most haunting piano loops in rap history. The World Is Yours turned a Scarface sample into an anthem for an entire generation. One Love was structured as letters to friends in prison, a concept so ahead of its time that rappers are still borrowing it 3 decades later. Even Eminem later said there are rhyme schemes on Illmatic that most rappers to this day probably cannot do. Illmatic debuted at number 12 on the Billboard 200, selling only 63,000 copies in its first week. Initial sales fell far below expectations, and none of its singles cracked the mainstream charts. The album was certified gold nearly 2 years after release and did not go platinum until 2001, 7 full years after it dropped. The Source magazine awarded it the coveted 5 Mic rating, a distinction so rare that only about 6 albums in the magazine's entire history had received it at that point. Illmatic was not a commercial juggernaut when it arrived. It was a slow-burning fire that eventually consumed the entire culture. The making of Reasonable Doubt. Sean Corey Carter had a different path. Before he became Jay-Z, he was a hustler on the streets of Brooklyn, and the lessons he learned in that life would fuel every bar on his debut record. Jay-Z had been rapping since the late 1980s, appearing alongside his mentor Jazzo, but no major label wanted to sign him, so he did what hustlers do. He created his own opportunity. Alongside Damon Dash and Kareem Biggs Burke, he co-founded Rockefeller Records and distributed Reasonable Doubt through Priority Records. Reasonable Doubt was released on June 25, 1996, and it was unlike anything the rap world had heard before. The production, led by Ski Beats, DJ Clark Kent, Nobody, and the legendary DJ Premier, was smooth, soulful, and cinematic. The featured artists read like a who's who of mid-90s royalty, including the notorious B.I.G. on Brooklyn's Finest, Mary J., Ly John Can Knock the Hustle, and a young Foxy Brown on Ain't No Nigga. But just like Illmatic, Reasonable Doubt did not explode commercially at first. It peaked at number 23 on the Billboard 200, moving only 43,000 copies in its opening week. By the end of 1996, it had sold 420,000 units. It did not receive its platinum certification from the RIAA until February of 2002, nearly 6 years after its release. The Source magazine gave it 4 mics, not the coveted 5, and that distinction would quietly haunt the comparison for years to come. Memphis Bleak later confirmed that Reasonable Doubt was intended to be Jay-Z's first and only album, The War. What makes this debate unlike any other in music history is that these two albums did not just compete on wax, they ignited one of the most vicious and personal feuds hip-hop has ever seen. The tension started quietly in 1996 when Nas reportedly failed to show up to a recording session for Jay-Z's track Bring It On. In Nas's absence, producer Ski Beats sampled a Nas vocal on Dead Presidents 2, and when Nas heard it, the fuse was lit. A month later, Nas dropped The Message from It Was Written, and the opening lyric referencing Alexis with TV screens was widely interpreted as a direct shot at Jay-Z. Then came the summer of 2001, and the pipe bomb exploded. At Hot 97's Summer Jam concert, Jay-Z performed a blistering freestyle attacking both Nas and Prodigy of Mobb Deep. A polished version became Takeover, produced by Kanye West, and it appeared on the Blueprint later that year. Jay-Z called Nas a has-been. He told the world Nas had one hot album every 10-year average. He questioned his street credibility, his relevance, and his legacy. For a moment, it felt like Nas's career might actually be over. People in barbershops and on street corners debated whether Takeover had ended Nas for good. But Nas was not finished. On his 2001 album, Illmatic, he unleashed a track called Ether, and it landed like a nuclear warhead on Jay-Z's entire existence. Jay-Z fired back with Super Ugly, and this is where things crossed a line that even hip-hop was not comfortable with. The response was so personal, so raw, and so cruel that Jay-Z's own mother, Gloria Carter, called into Hot 97 radio and publicly demanded that her son apologize. Jay-Z called into the station shortly after and apologized, a moment that remains one of the most surreal episodes in rap history. The summer of 2002, Nas attempted to perform at Hot 97's Summer Jam with a hanging robotic dummy of Jay-Z dangling from the stage. The station refused to allow it. The Peeps. On October 27, 2005, at Power 105.1's Powerhouse concert at the Continental Airlines Arena in New Jersey, Jay-Z headlined in front of a sold-out crowd of 15,000 people. In the middle of his set, he did something nobody expected. He brought Nas out on stage. The two men who had torn New York apart with their words stood side by side and performed Dead Presidents and The World Is Yours together. Jay-Z told the crowd that all the beef was done and that they had their fun. The arena erupted. It was not just a concert moment. The legacy. Now here is where the question gets truly difficult to answer. And honestly, this is the part where your voice matters more than mine. If you have been watching this far, you already know which side your heart leans toward. Drop a comment right now and tell me in one word, just one, which album changed your life more, Illmatic or Reasonable Doubt? And if this story moved you, if it reminded you why hip-hop matters, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Illmatic was ranked number 44 on Rolling Stone's original 500 Greatest Albums of All Time list and climbed even higher in the updated version. Apple Music placed it at number 39 on its 100 Best Albums Ever Created. In 2020, the Library of Congress selected Illmatic for preservation in the National Recording Registry. The verdict. So is Illmatic a better album than Reasonable Doubt? The truth is that both of these records were commercial underdogs that became cultural monuments. Both were debut albums by young men who grew up in New York City housing projects, survived environments that were designed to destroy them, and channeled every ounce of that pain into art that will outlive us all. Illmatic is tighter, more poetic, more universally revered, and it sits in the Library of Congress as proof that hip-hop belongs alongside the greatest artistic achievements in American history. Reasonable Doubt is smooth and more cinematic and definitely deserved 5 mics, and eventually ended with two kings standing together on the same stage. That is not just a debate about music, that is the story of hip-hop itself, told in 2 acts by 2 geniuses who proved that greatness does not have to come in just one form.